Gonzaga looks to close out 2024 at the Kennel on a high note with a second straight 30-plus point victory, this time facing the Bisons of Bucknell.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Gametime. Folks, download the Gametime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. All right, folks, Mark Few is officially eligible to be enshrined in the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame in the class of 2025. We're going to talk about that to close out the show, his accolades, what it means for him to be on this list, etc. But before we get to that, we got to get you ready for this weekend's game against the Bucknell Bisons, Saturday, December 21st at 6 p.m. Pacific time. Bucknell stood out a little bit because Gonzaga's 4 games in December on Saturdays were against Kentucky in Seattle for the Climate Pledge Arena, or in the battle in Seattle at Climate Pledge Arena, UConn at Madison Square Garden, Bucknell, and then UCLA at the Intuit Dome. Very, very incredible group. Again, the definition of blue blood is variable, but I think there's a reasonable argument that Kentucky, UConn, and UCLA are either currently blue bloods or have been blue bloods. There's no argument for Bucknell to be in that conversation, which is why they stand out. Not as much of a knock on Bucknell as much as the fact that Gonzaga is playing those 3 teams for 3 of the 4 Saturdays in December is part of why this team has maybe not played their best hoops in December of the last couple of years, because they're playing some really, really tough games. Again, December 21st, this Saturday, 6 p.m., it's going to once again be on KHQ in the Spokane market. It's going to be on ESPN Plus outside of that market. It's also going to be on Fox 13 Plus in Seattle. I hope that went smoothly for everybody watching in that Seattle area. I mentioned on Thursday's episode that there were some technical difficulties on the ESPN Plus side in the Portland area, at least for myself, when watching the game against Nichols. Hopefully, that is something that is sorted out for this game against Bucknell on Saturday. I mentioned it in the cold open. This is the last home game of 2024 for the Gonzaga men's basketball team. They are taking on UCLA next Saturday at the Intuit Dome, like we said, and then they will play Pepperdine to kick off conference play on December 30th. But that game's going to be down in Malibu at Firestone Fieldhouse, so the Zags won't be back at the McCarthy Athletic Center until 2025. Bucknell is a member of the Patriot League. Patriot League is where Braden Smith, the current guard on the Gonzaga roster who is redshirting, who's expected to be the replacement for Ryan Nembhard next season. Braden Smith spent 2 years at Colgate. He was the Patriot League Player of the Year prior to transferring to Gonzaga. The Zags have only played 2 games ever against teams in the Patriot League. They've never played Bucknell. In fact, Bucknell is making their first trip ever to the state of Washington as a men's basketball program. So this is a new territory for Bucknell. For Gonzaga, they beat Boston University way back in 1990. They beat Lafayette in Spokane in 2010. Those are the only 2 times they have ever played a team in the Patriot League. And again, obviously Bucknell is a new opponent for them as well. So let's meet this Bison club. Currently on the season, Bucknell is 4-7. They've played a handful of high major programs or quality programs, including Kentucky, the one opponent these two have in common. And Kentucky beat Bucknell by 28 points earlier this season. I think it was 100-72, I believe, was the final score. It's actually very similar to Gonzaga's score against Nichols. I just realized that was 102-72. They also lost to Bucknell. Also lost to Maryland by 24 points. They also lost to the Bonnies of St. Bonaventure out of the A-10 conference by 17. Those are their 3 losses to top 100 KenPom teams. They also have a loss to Mount St. Mary's, who's 257th, Rider, who's 303rd, Siena, who's 274th, and Radford, their most recent loss, who's 179th at KenPom as I'm currently recording this. The Bison are on a 5-game losing streak. They do have 4 wins on the year. Their wins, none of them particularly impressive in terms of the quality of opponent. They've beat Delaware, Southern Indiana, Richmond, and NJIT. Currently at KenPom, those teams rank respectively 234th, 276th, 218th, and 355th. So unsurprisingly, a team that's 4-7 without any good wins and with a couple of not very good losses, they're not doing too hot in the KenPom rankings themselves. 260th currently at KenPom overall. Their adjusted defensive efficiency is not too bad, 157th. So they're about exactly average among D1 college basketball teams, a little above average in terms of defensive efficiency. Tempo-wise, they're 194th, so not as slow as some of the teams Gonzaga's faced, but certainly not a flying up and down the court type of team. The issue for the Bison is pretty simple. Their offense is anemic, currently 329th in adjusted offensive efficiency at KenPom. The KenPom data points to this team being a bad offensive team, but so does the eye test, so do the other statistics. This team as a team collectively is shooting 29.9% from 3, just under 30% as a team. That's 327th in the country. They're shooting 53% on 2-pointers, which is 169th. Not awful, but certainly not good. And then shockingly, they're even worse than either of those at the free throw line, where they shoot collectively 62.9%. That's 346. They're one of the 20 worst free throw shooting teams in the country, one of the 35 worst 3-point shooting teams in the country, basically average as a 2-point shooting team. This is not a good offensive team. They're decent defensively, but they really struggle to score the basketball. Now, the Bison do return 6 of their 7 starters from last year, 6 of their 7 scorers, not starters, obviously, from last year's team. And last year's team was tied for second in the Patriot League. So this was a team that was expected to compete to be first or second this year in the Patriot League, as we so often see. A team that finished well in the league the previous year, returned most of their starters, or had a lot of roster continuity, especially at the mid-major level, where many teams are turning over 5, 6, 8 guys year over year, because a lot of those players who are successful are transferring up to the higher levels. To see a team with 7 of their 8 leading scorers be juniors or seniors, with 6 of their 7 leading scorers from last year returning to the roster, you'd expect them to be having a bit of a better start to the season. Just hasn't been the case for this team up to this point. Perhaps they'll turn it around once conference play gets going. They're led by 2 returners from last year's team, Josh Bosco and Noah Williamson. Bosco's averaging about 14 points, a little under 5 rebounds, about 3.8 assists per game. Williamson is their big man. He's from Latvia, 7-footer, about 245 pounds. A big dude, especially in the Patriot League. That is a big, big dude that those teams are going to have to go up against. He was 3rd team All-Patriot League last year. Wouldn't be surprised if he's 2nd or even 1st team this year. Currently on the season, averaging 13.5 points, 6.5 boards, 1.7 assists, and 1.5 blocks per game. Shoot about 59% on 2-pointers. He does take quite a few threes and is quite bad at them. I'm not sure why they're incorporating a lot of their 7-footer hacking up threes, but I think he's shooting like 21%. So probably an area of his game that maybe we'll see them move away from that, especially when they're playing some of the smaller teams in the Patriot League. So what does this mean for the Zags? Well, we saw a disappointing start in their game against Nichols on Wednesday. They ended up winning by 30. The final result was great, but we don't want to see that again. So let's see Gonzaga go out and get a big lead against this team, never relinquish it. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what else we want to see from this Gonzaga team in this contest on Saturday. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? Because this definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's kind of like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money currently has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services that I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a bunch of money. Plus, with Rocket Money's goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every single month. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Today's episode is also brought to you by Gametime. Folks, the college basketball season, we are fully in swing, and there is nothing better than the atmosphere of a game. Whether it's the anticipation of what's about to happen, the energy buzzing in the crowd, the unexpected coming to life, Zombie Nation blasting out at the McCarthy Athletic Center, and more. And folks, Gametime now has a feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. And it's not just for basketball, but concerts, comedy shows, theater, and more as well. And so whether it's Gametime's ticketing coverage, the lowest price guarantee, or the panoramic views from your seat in the app, Gametime has you covered. Folks, I literally just used Gametime like half an hour before hitting the record button here to get some tickets. I tell you what game, except that it is a Christmas present for somebody, so I don't want to spoil it now. But if you're looking to get out to that game against UCLA, now that the Gametime has moved up to 1 p.m., and you're thinking, all right, I can hit that game up, you can get tickets right now on Gametime for $75 a piece up on the terrace at the Intuit Dome. There's super deal right now. There's 2 tickets on the baseline, really good seats, just $177 a piece. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Gametime app today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still getting you ready for Gonzaga's game against the Bison of Bucknell on Saturday at 6 p.m. at the McCarthy Athletic Center. We're going to talk about our keys to victory. Again, for games like this where Gonzaga is heavily favored to win, we talk less about like, here's what they specifically need to do to beat this team, and more like, what do we want to see? What are things that would be beneficial for Gonzaga to get done in this game? Not only that leads to a victory, but that also, generates some more confidence, gets them more prepared for UCLA, whatever it may be. So we're going to talk about those 5 kind of keys, questions, things we're looking for in this game. And the first one, we teased it before we got into this segment, got to start hot. 2 games in a row, Gonzaga has gotten off to really ugly starts. They were down 13-2 against UConn. It wasn't good, but going down early to a team like UConn in a pseudo road environment, it's somewhat forgivable. Obviously, you'd have loved to see Gonzaga come back and win that game. They played really well for the rest of that half, but were never really able to overcome that early deficit. For them to go down early against Nicholls, a team that doesn't have the firepower or the horses to hang with Gonzaga, a team that was playing away from their home, playing at Gonzaga's home stadium, like that was not excusable. It was a really, really sad, just ugly performance from the Zags in the first 10 to 12, even 15-ish minutes of that first half against Nicholls. We got to be done with that. 2 straight slow starts. There's no excuse against a Bucknell team that's one of the worst scoring teams in the country. There's just no reason for Gonzaga. Gonzaga should be up 10 by the first media timeout. I'm not saying anything less than that is a failure, but I'm also kind of not saying that. If Gonzaga's within a possession or even within 2 possessions at the first media timeout, we're going to be disappointed. If they're up 8 versus 10, fine, whatever. It doesn't need to be like 15-0 or anything like that, but it would sure be nice to go to the first media timeout with our stomach not already in knots from the start of the game. There's no excuse against this team. We need to see that fire. We need to see that competitiveness. I know it's the second straight game without students. It's right before Christmas. It's the end of the year. I understand all of that. There's no excuse. You got to go deliver right away in this basketball game. It's got to be scoring the first couple of possessions, up 8, up 10 at that first media timeout. That feels like what we really want to and almost in a way need to see from this Gonzaga team going into the Christmas break and eventually that game against UCLA the following week. Key number 2, we've talked about this a handful of times on the show already. We talked about it after the Kentucky game. We talked about it a little bit earlier this week as well. The Zags need to get Michael Ajayi going. Michael Ajayi transferred to Gonzaga after leading the WCC in scoring, and I think he was second in rebounding last year. He averaged like just about 18 and 10 for Pepperdine last year. Came in after spending the entire summer in the NBA draft process, and he hasn't looked like that guy yet this year. Ajayi's only scored in double figures twice in his Gonzaga career. He scored 15 points against Indiana in the battle for Atlantis. He scored 14 points against UConn. A really nice game for him against UConn. That's how we kind of know that he's capable of being a player who contributes at that level for this team. But for the most part, he hasn't been that guy. He did not have a good game against Nichols. He had a breakaway dunk. And other than that, I think he only scored 2 free throws. He had 4 points. He was 1 of 5 from the field in that game. We've had too many performances where Ajayi is just a complete non-factor. Where at the end of the game, you're thinking, okay, Nolan was great, Ben was great, Braden was great, whatever. And Michael just, it's not even that he was actively bad, it's that you kind of just forget that he played. Like, he's had too many games like that where you're like, oh yeah, Michael played 12 minutes or 14 minutes or whatever. And he just didn't make a big impact in the game. He's shooting 57% on 2-pointers this year, so he hasn't been super inefficient in that area, but he is an abysmal 4 of 21 from 3, 19%. This guy shot 47% from 3 last year at Pepperdine. It was a small volume, but it's a small volume this year, and he's just not knocking them down. I'm sure that's going to come up, but I think what we want to see in this game is Mark Few and the staff running some plays to get him looks. Whether it's specific offensive sets, whether it's posting him up, I know it's not really a big part of his game, getting him in isolation on pick and rolls, whatever it may be, we need to see him get some confidence. And this is the kind of game where going out and scoring 15 points, being efficient, hitting a couple threes would be great just to get him feeling more confident, because they're going to need him against UCLA and they're really going to need him in conference play. So to me, obviously winning this game is the most important thing, but I really think seeing Ajayi have a good game is going to be impactful for this team going forward. Key number 3, I want to see more of Emmanuel Innocente. And I think this is a game where we could do that. Now, I thought that against the Nichols in the Nichols game as well. And even though Gonzaga ultimately coasted to a 30-point victory, they didn't bring in the backups as soon as I think I would have expected them to. We saw Joe Few for, I think, 2 or 3 minutes, Jun Sukio for 2 or 3 minutes, Innocente for about 2 to 3 minutes as well. We didn't see Ismaila Diani. We didn't see any of the other walk-ons. But of all the players in that group, Innocente is the one who is not only arguably the most important in terms of future at Gonzaga outside of this season, but I think it's the most important for this season too. There's a pretty good chance the Zags at some point are going to really need Emmanuel Innocente, whether it's an injury, whether it's foul trouble in a certain game, whether it's just matchup specific. We've already seen Innocente play in the first half of games against very marquee opponents. He's not playing, huge minutes. He's not really playing more than 5 minutes in those games, but we've seen him come in late in the first half in order to help prevent somebody from picking up a third foul and just going in and playing tough defense. Mark Few trusts him. He doesn't trust guys to come in the first half of games unless he really believes that they're capable of positively impacting the game. So in this game, if Gonzaga does do what they're supposed to do, does jump out to an early lead, is comfortably ahead by 15 plus points through the majority of the contest, which is frankly what they should do in this game, it would be lovely to see Innocente play 12 to 15 minutes. Probably going to be mostly in the second half, but I would like to see that. I would like to see him feel more comfortable in this offense, feel more comfortable in the system, feel more comfortable with his role offensively and defensively, not just because he's going to take on a bigger role next year, but because they might need him this year as well. Key number 4 has been a key in most of the games this year, and it's been kind of, we usually treat it as like this is something they need to do to win. In this case, I just want to see Gonzaga continue to work on this, and that's just defensive communication. This team has defended the perimeter extremely well this year. They're one of the best teams in the country at not giving up 3-point attempts or 3-point makes for the opposing team. They're playing a team that is horrendous at shooting the basketball. Pretty good chance that Bucknell does not shoot well from 3 in this game. But just because Bucknell didn't shoot well doesn't mean that Gonzaga obviously did well in this area. We want to see it. I want to see players communicating, pointing, yelling. I want to see them navigating screens well. I want to see hard-nosed, physical, intense defensive effort for a full 40 minutes. This team is good defensively. The metrics like them defensively. The opposing team's field goal percentages indicate this team is quality defensively. We know that, but let's see it. Go out and put the absolute clamps on this team. There's no reason this team should score more than 65 points in this game. Go out and prove it. Hold this team to 60-something points. Hold them to a really inefficient night shooting the basketball. Get turnovers, get out in transition, dunk, get the crowd that's there, the non-student crowd, out into a frenzy. Like, those are the kind of things we want to see in this game. Just some energy, some enthusiasm on that end of the floor. And then key number 5, almost always going to talk about it in games like this against these quality opponents. Let's see the end of the bench guys. We already talked about Innocente, but let's see Ismaila Dione get on the floor. Love seeing him play. Love seeing what his upside looks like. Let's see Junsook Yo, fan favorite for a reason. He got a 3-point opportunity in the last game, didn't knock it down, but let's see him get one this game. Let's see Joaquin Reyes-Moore, who didn't play in that game against Nichols either, but has been very fun in the 2 games he has played this year. Let's see Noah Holland get his first points. Let's see Joe Few back on the floor. Would love to see at least some of those guys get opportunities in this game coming up on Saturday against the Bison. Well, folks, Mark Few is officially a candidate for the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame 2025 class. We're going to talk about his candidacy, who else is on the ballot with him, what it means for him and his chances of being a Hall of Famer. All that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, it is that time of year. The college football playoffs are back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports' coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern time, leading into the first matchup, the SMU Mustangs taking on the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then after that, the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, moving away from getting you ready for the Saturday showdown with the Bison of Bucknell to instead talk about the other news that came out on Thursday afternoon, the release of the first-time candidates for the 2025 Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame class, and included Mark Few. Now, the way that this works is if you are an active coach, you do not become eligible to be in the Hall of Fame until you have coached as a head coach for 25 or more years. This is why Mark Few is now coming up as a candidate for the Basketball Hall of Fame. We've seen many, many coaches get inducted while they are active coaches. Bob Huggins was inducted as an active coach. Bill Self was inducted as an active coach. Gino Auriemma from UConn was inducted like in 2006. I think Bill Self was inducted in like 2007, like a long, long time ago. Those guys are still coaching. Tom Izzo's in the Hall of Fame. Like, it's not uncommon to be included as a Hall of Fame candidate before your career is over. And that's what we're seeing here with Coach Few. The list, again, was announced on Thursday. A few other names from the coaching perspective: Lisa Blutter, the Iowa women's basketball coach who recently retired; Billy Donovan, who won back-to-back national championships as the head coach of Florida back in 2007 and 2006, 2007. Doc Rivers is on the list as well, obviously for his time as a coach in the NBA. Also new to the ballot, Carmelo Anthony. These are not as coaches, obviously as players. Carmelo Anthony on the list, Dwight Howard, Mark Gasol. On the women's basketball side, some of the names: Maya Moore, Sylvia Fowles, Chamique Holdskla, Sue Bird. For those other West Coast fans who are hoping to see some more Pacific Northwest flavor in the Hall of Fame, we got Mark Few and Sue Bird both on that list. Finalists are going to be selected on February 14th at NBA All-Star Weekend. When I say finalists, I don't mean the actual inductees. I mean that's going to be they're going to narrow it down. A quote from the Hall of Fame said there's 189 different candidates between coaches and players and executives and all sorts of different categories that they have. There are 189 candidates. They're going to whittle it all the way down. The finalists that they're selecting from will be announced on February 14th at the NBA All-Star Weekend in San Francisco. And then the actual class of inductees will be announced on April 5th at the Final Four. And then the actual enshrinement ceremony will happen September 5th and 6th in Springfield, Massachusetts. So that's the status with where Mark Few is at right now. And if you're thinking, what are his chances? We're going to get more into that later. We're going to talk to people who are more plugged into what it takes to be a Hall of Fame coach and kind of what the committee, how they typically vote, things of that nature. We're going to get more into it. But let me say this. There are 100 individual coaches who have already been inducted. Those 100 coaches come from NBA backgrounds, from WNBA background, from ABA background, from college background, various different backgrounds of coaches. There are many, many, many Hall of Fame men's college basketball coaches. And I think an important detail, one that I think a lot of people are probably wondering at this point, how many of those coaches who are inducted have not won a national championship? And there's more than you would think. More than you would think. The recently passed away Lou Carnesecca, who passed away at age 99, longtime head coach at St. John's. He's been a Hall of Famer for decades, and he never won a national championship from his time at St. John's or previous stops as well. John Chaney was a longtime head coach at Temple. He didn't win a championship. Bob Hurley Sr., the father of Bobby Hurley and Dan Hurley, he was a longtime phenomenal coach, didn't win a championship. Guy Lewis was at Houston, took that team to a Final Four, not a championship. Jerry Tarkanian, head coach at UNLV, very, very famous basketball coach, but again, not a champion. Bob Huggins is a very notable recent example of a Hall of Famer. I think he was inducted in 2022, and he did not, I should say, I don't think he's coming back to coaching anytime soon, did not win a national championship for his career. Gene Keady was a longtime head coach at Purdue, didn't win a championship. That's not a complete list, but that is a list of the names that I recognize that I know did not win a championship that we can talk about here, because that puts Mark Few in a situation where it's not national championship or no Hall of Fame for Coach Few. In fact, I think the likelihood is that Mark Few will be a Hall of Famer regardless of whether he actually takes Gonzaga to a championship victory in his career. It would likely accelerate the process. If Mark Few doesn't get in this year, then whatever year he wins a championship, he's probably getting in that year. Like, I think that I don't think that that's something they're waiting on necessarily, but it's certainly going to make it easier to put him in the Hall of Fame. But the accolades are already there. They're already there. Two-time Naismith Coach of the Year, 2017 and 2021. Two-time NABC Coach of the Year, same years, 2017 and 2021. AP Coach of the Year in 2017. 14-time West Coast Conference Coach of the Year. Highest winning percentage of all time in a minimum of 600 career games coached. No coach in college basketball history in men's basketball, 600 minimum games, has a better winning percentage than Mark Few at 83.2%. That, to me, is an incredibly critical and important stat in Mark Few's legacy. People want to point to the quality of competition, but nobody else has ever done it. Nobody else has ever won 83% of their games and coached as many games as Mark Few. It's not nobody's ever done it who coached at a power conference level. Nobody's ever done it, period. Mark Few has the most consecutive NCAA tournament appearances to start a head coaching career at 24. Mark Few is the only coach to win your conference championship 8 years in a row, 2 separate times in his career. Mark Few is also not just accomplished professionally from his time as the head coach of the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Certainly that is where the majority of his accomplishments come from. But Few also led Team USA to a bronze medal in the 2015 Pan American Games in Toronto. And of course, most recently, he was an assistant coach for the 2024 gold medal winning Team USA men's basketball club in Paris Olympics this summer, was the only college coach on staff, was on that staff alongside Steve Kerr and Ty Lue and Eric Spoelstra. Phenomenal stuff from him. The players, LeBron, Steph, AD, etc., all sung the praises of Mark Few, talked about how much they liked working with him. He's has that added now to a resume. A gold medal, a bronze medal, multiple Coach of the Year records, some all-time records for win percentage. Mark Few's an icon in this sport. And to me, when you look at the other names in the Hall of Fame, the other ones who are more comparable as his peers, Huggins is probably, again, the best example of a modern coach who is in the Hall of Fame who didn't win a championship. Few also gets compared to, Tom Izzo's and even, Coach K or Roy Williams or Bill Self or those guys, but those guys all have championships. So their resumes stand out in a different way from Coach Few's. But, Jim Boeheim is in the Hall of Fame. He coached for a super long time. He only won 1 championship from his time at Syracuse. And Boeheim absolutely deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, but I don't think most people think, Boeheim's a much more accomplished coach than Few. Like, I don't really get the sense that that's how it's viewed to me at all. So again, we'll talk more about this. I'm excited to dig into this a little bit more, maybe try to find some guests who are really experienced with kind of Hall of Fame candidacies and legacies and things like that, and get a chance to kind of really dig into what is it feel like Mark Few's going in this year? Is he going to be on the ballot for a super long time? Like, how's this going to kind of shake out for him? But just being named on this ballot is obviously a tremendous accomplishment. We knew it was coming. We knew it was going to happen for Coach Few. And I think most people expect that, he's going to be a Hall of Famer, but whether it's this summer, whether it's another year, kind of remains to be seen. But we're going to have some more conversations about this and kind of what it means for Coach Few and what his chances are of being enshrined in Springfield as soon as 2025 might be. That is, however, going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast and for this week. Folks, want to say thank you to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Hope you have a fantastic pre-Christmas weekend. Enjoy the game on Saturday. We'll be back next week recapping that game. We'll also have some fun holiday-themed episodes, and then, of course, we'll get you ready for that big game the following Saturday against Mick Cronin and the Bruins on the 28th. Thanks again, folks, and until next time, as always, go Zags.